Okay. We are ready to start. We are almost at the end of this year path. So welcome all to session number 6 of the Synchronisation Force, which is dedicated to metadata semantics and interoperability. And I'll leave the floor to Esteban Gonzalez, who will chair the session today. So Esteban, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah, and welcome everybody. I'm going to share my screen now. See if it's working. Fantastic. Okay, so just tell me if there is any problem to see my screen.
No, we can probably see it. Yeah.
Fantastic. So welcome to this new edition of the Synchronization workshop about metadata, semantics and interoperability. If you remember from previous editions, we talked about the metadata schemas and other interoperative frameworks. Okay, we will see that today we are going to focus in the components of the EOSC Interoperability Framework. I'm Esteban Gonzalez from UPN, Universidad Politécnica de Madrid. I'm going to be the chair of these sessions, and also we have a co-chair that is Nina Grau from INRAE, and a rapporteur, and Sofie Fink from DeiC. Okay, if you remember from the summary that we sent you about the content of this workshop, we are going to focus, as I said before, in the EOSC Interoperability Framework. And you know that this framework has different layers, okay? We will see that we will going to focus on the semantic view, okay, the semantic layer of this one. One of the biggest challenges that we have in this EOSC Interoperability Framework is how to adopt these recommendations that you can find in the documents and also in the recommendations given by the different task forces, and also to put in practice all these things that we can see in the document that is very theoretical. Some details of the session. So the session will be recorded, but only for internal use, okay, for the sorry.
Yeah, it works now.
Can you hear
Yes.
me?
Yes, yes.
There was a problem, sorry. Also, we have a collaborative document, okay, that you can use. We just put the link in the chat. You can find the link in the chat for using during the sessions. It is important to please refrain from editing other people's information, okay? Even if you see any typo. And in the document, you will see more details, okay, about this workshop. And also you will see some of the pointers to the different slides that we will present during the workshop, okay? Also, we will publish the slides in one single slide deck, okay? And we will put it available in Zenodo and also in the webpage of the FAIR project. Yes, so if you want to add more information to this collaborative document, and also you want to continue working in the survey, just response to the different questions that we plan during the session and before the session, it will be open until the November 7th, okay? So you are free to answer again answer to this survey, or even to editing some contents in the document. What are the objectives of this workshop? Well, first, our idea of this workshop is we want to know how the components of the EOSC Interoperability Framework are being developed. Okay, there are some European projects that they are working in these different components. So we want to know exactly what is the status of these components and the decision that they are taking to develop these components. Also, we want to know how the recommendations of the EOSC Interoperability Framework can be implemented in the future, those components that they are not being developed right now. And also, how can we measure the level of implementation of the EOSC Interoperability Framework? Okay, so as you can see, during this workshop, we are going to focus in clear examples of the components that they are being developing right now, and we want to have a clear picture, no, of the different developments in the European projects. What is the agenda? Well, we will start with a brief presentation, introduction to the EOSC Interoperability Framework components. Also, we are starting in Fair Impact in collaboration with Faircore for EOS, an exercise about the measure the compliance of the interoperability policies that we say. Okay, so I'm going to expose some of the thoughts that we have about this. We're very happy to get feedback from you. We will continue with two clear examples of the EOSC Interoperability Framework components that they are being implemented right now. The first one is the Semantic Artifact Catalog, which will be given by Clément Jonquet from INRAE. Okay? And also we will talk about the mappings, crossword, and associated registry, okay, by Jean Lefranc from a Science Data Factory. And we will see a real implementation of these crossword mappings with the tool MSCR. This presentation is going to be by Jonas Kesenemi from CDC. After that, and I promise that we will try to make very short presentations, we will finish with a plenary discussion where we will plan some of the questions that you will see in this document, and we will start discussing about it. Okay, this section will be moderated and coordinated by Nina Grau from INRAE. Okay, so basically this is the main question that we plan that we send in the survey. So I want especially thanks to all the participants to give us some responses. Okay, and for sure we will compile of these responses together with the information that we plan to collect today. Okay, and put it all together in a report. Okay, for sure. Our disposal is put everything available to everybody. Okay, so let me start with the presentation of the EOSC Interoperability Framework components. Any doubt or any question for the moment? Is everything clear? Okay, so let's move to the next presentation. So, well, what is exactly the EOSC Interoperability Framework? Well, probably most of you already know. The EOSC Interoperability Framework is a set of policies and guidelines that enable interoperability of resources and services and will facilitate service composability. Okay? I'm just reading the document. I'm working for some years in the interoperability and in the interoperability framework. And for sure, there is some very interesting initiatives about the implementation of this framework. And I have to say that most of these initiatives is focused in the data, no? Data sharing, data interoperability. Okay? But we have to think that there is another resources that we need to work in the interoperability of these resources. Okay, you can find this the term, for example, of research output. Okay, so it is not only important to make these resources interoperable like data, but also another like software, workflows, etc. And also it seems important the interoperability between the services. Okay, so there is now a discussion in the opportunity area group and also in the recent interoperability task force. Okay, where, well, if you have a component, okay, it means a service, but this service it is not only a data repository. Okay, that you need data interoperability. It could be a service to do another thing. Okay, so to integrate this in the EOSC Interoperability Framework, you have to define this interface of the service, okay, following the interoperability principles. Okay? And this is something that I think for the moment is not very mature, okay, but for sure this is something that we have to think in the future, okay, and maybe we can discuss it during the plenary discussion, okay. But just remember that the EOSC Interoperability Framework is not only about data sharing, is sharing another resources, including services. No, it means that you need to discover different services. So remember that if you want to discover these services, you need an interface, and this interface must be defined by some schema or some semantic artifact. Okay. So it's important to discover the services and also to interact the discoverability of these services allow you to interact to allow the interaction between the different services. Okay, and this is really, really important. Also, as you can see, this is important for the sphere. Okay, from the sphere, we have the achieving a good level of technical, semantic, organizational, and legal interoperability within EOS is essential to federate services, okay, and provide added value for users across discipline, countries, and sectors. Okay, so remember, not just only to come to, we can say the interaction between data is between services. Okay, we have to start thinking, I think, in the service level. What are we have different layers in the EOS Interoperability Framework. We started with the technical interoperability, and we can find there infrastructure providers, services, frameworks, APIs, etc. And then we have the semantic interoperability layer. Okay. In this case, we work with community standards, metadata, ontologies, interpretation of meaning, structures, etc. Okay, I really like one of the sentences that I read in a document, but I don't remember exactly the document what I read it. Okay, is that shared meaning is what is sent is what is understood. Okay, so if a service doesn't understand the other service, okay, we don't have this communication at the semantic level. Okay, that's, I think that it's important to start working in the semantic artifacts that allow you to interact between services. Okay, not only from resources. Then we have another layers like the organizational interoperability layer that you can define policies, etc., and also the legal interoperability. Okay, because if you want to access to a service or to some specific data, etc., you have to represent these access rights. Okay, and you have to represent in the whole levels of the layers. Okay, not only in the we can say in the legal interoperability, you have to represent in the semantic interoperability, which means that we need semantic artifacts that express these legal properties, and also in the technical interoperability, okay, with the authentication process, etc. This is a high-level architecture of the EOS Interoperability Framework. You will see that we have different components. The idea of this architecture was creating different building blocks for the different components, okay? You can see that, for example, in the legal view and organizational view, well, there is a big component, okay, but we don't have the granularity that we have in another layers, okay? As I said before, we have the technical layers, and in this technical layer, we have components like the Authentication and Authorization Interoperability Framework, the PID Framework, Metadata Framework, Data Access Framework, Open Metrics Framework, Security Framework, etc. Okay, so this is we can see that the building blocks, the blocks that they are at the bottom of this structure. Okay? And for sure, it is very close to the technology. Okay? Then we have the semantic view, and we are going to focus in the semantic view components. Okay, so in this case, we have different components inside them. As you can see, is the first digital object is the central, one of the central elements. Why? Well, because as I mentioned before, we are talking about resources, okay? And these resources have different nature, okay? It is not only data, remember, software, anything. And also they are in different domains. So that is the reason that in this approach, okay, is object nature agnostic. Another question is if the FDO, we can say object, is possible to build it or not, okay? I think it is probably, we will enter in the discussion, okay? So these components that you can see gives, the components that you see in the semantic functional contents give the functionality to the system, okay? And everything is is controlled and supervised by the semantic governance. Okay, so when we deal with a semantic artifact, for example, and probably Clomon will comment later, okay, you need a semantic artifact governance framework, no? Something that you define what is the life cycle of this semantic artifact, etc. Okay, so this rule must be defined. It must be defined in the organization that is working with these semantic artifacts, but also it must be defined, in my opinion, in the EOSC Interoperability Framework. No, how is working the life cycle of this semantic artifact? So again, the semantic governance content, as I said before, is focused on the semantic artifact lifecycle, and it specifies the decision rights and accountabilities for an organization. Okay, and I said before, this organization could be some institution, but also the EOS, no, the EOS Interoperability Framework. You can find more information. We from Fair Impact, we recently published one deliverable related with this content, and you can find the link in these slides. Okay. From the semantic view components, we have what we call the semantic business object. In this case, we have the semantic artifact with different levels of complexity, and also the ontologies, could be like ontologies, terminology, controlled vocabularies, etc. Okay, and in the part of metadata, we always have the concept about minimal metadata and domain metadata, etc. So I think this could be a very nice discussion that we can address later, especially in the presentation of Jan. As you remember, well, in this case, there are different approaches. For example, we have the cross-domain interoperability framework that they are establishing we can say these mappings between the different domain schemas with a minimum schema. But also there is another approach to make the mappings between the different schemas directly. Okay, and you can find very interesting thoughts of Simon Hodson from the Warfare Project about the CEDIF. They are very interesting approach. Okay, unfortunately, we are not going to enter in this approach in this workshop, but I will encourage you to looking for. Even we can share the links if you are interested. They recently published the deliverable. Also the semantic functional content. So in this case, we have three major components that they are metadata catalog, the semantic artifact catalog, and the mapping repository. So one of the objectives of this one is what initiatives are implemented in these blocks. No, you will see two examples of them during this workshop. I don't know if you have any question or comment.
I would have a small question.
Yeah, Barbara, go ahead.
Just because I'm curious, I see it everywhere, but what is exactly the difference between a controlled vocabulary and a terminology? I never understood that difference.
Me neither, most of the times.
Okay. So it's just to have the term there. I don't know. For me, it's really not easy to differentiate this.
Yeah, Simon Hodson raised the hand.
Yeah, I mean, hi Barbara, hi Esteban. Essentially synonyms. I don't think there's a substantive difference. I think it's a matter of disciplinary domain tradition. You hear controlled vocabularies being used a lot more in the social sciences historically. Vocabularies more in areas of natural sciences that we've worked with. But beyond that, I don't think there's a substantive difference. Someone may have examples where there is, but not as far as I can not in our experience.
I agree
And
with
it's
Simon.
one of the yeah, sorry.
I agree with
Go ahead.
Simon. And actually, I would say from the biosciences, we use the word control vocabulary. So, hey ho, there we go.
Yeah.
I just don't.
I think it's just, yeah.
Thank you.
It's discipline tradition, but these things are important as well. It's important to be mindful that there are these disciplinary differences, and to have a little mental map of the equivalences across domains. And obviously, this is an area that we're working in a lot. But the fact that it's easy to trip over these differences in terminology, but we need to be mindful that sometimes the differences are less great than the difference in terminology might suggest.
In answer to Clement's point about ontologies, no, there is a difference between ontologies and controlled vocabularies in the biosciences, but I'm not going to get into that here. That's another day's discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why we invented the term semantic artifact, so that everybody can agree that they're all containing semantics, whatever the form. And we stop having this debate, which is still actually academically discussed with papers. So if you look at the Ferris Fair recommendations on fair semantics, you will find links to papers discussing what is an ontology and what is not, and disagreement. So, so the idea is to avoid this. But indeed, we need to take into consideration the use of language. And we have the same thing for mappings, for instance, where in different communities it might mean different things.
Okay, thank you. Any other question? Okay, so I'm just continue with the presentation about the interoperability policy. Okay, I think it will be a polemic topic probably. Okay, so this is something that we are working in the Fair Impact project in collaboration also with Fair Core for EOS, and I think it could be a very good scenario to test if it's a good idea or not. So I will need your feedback a little bit. Okay. To see if it's a good idea to continue working in this line or not, or just to remove it. No. So our main motivation was to the EOSC Interoperability Framework provides, as you know, some recommendations for each layer, but sometimes they are difficult to try to understand, even to try to put into practice. Okay, this recommendation. Okay, because there is sometimes that there are some general. Okay, and if you try to comment with, I don't know, some people who wants to make their system more interoperable with EOS or inside of their institution, well, sometimes it's difficult to them to understand what is exactly they need to do. Okay? Also, in another scenario, if you want to develop a component, okay, to be integrated in the EOS, okay, in the EOS architecture, and make it interoperable with another components, for sure using the EOS Interoperability Framework. So how can you measure the compliance of the component that you are developing with the EOS Interoperability Framework? Okay, so if you want to integrate it, you have to test several things. Even in the onboarding process of the different services in EOS, they have some tests. Okay, but I think these tests just reach we can say the technical layer. Okay, but I think it could be interesting another test related with the semantic view and even with another layers of the EOS. Okay, so in this case we need some means of verification, metrics, criterion, checklists, etc. Okay, something that guide to the people to we can say to assess this compliance of the components that they want to make it interoperable inside of the EOS ecosystem. So what is the objective of this task that we are starting? We want to build a framework to assess the compliance of the component with an EOS interoperability policies. I don't know if it exists or not, or they are going to exist someday, or well, I'm not very sure about it. if you attend to workshop about PIDs, well, the idea is quite similar, okay? But instead of using the PIDs, okay, or focus on the PIDs topic, we want to focus in the interoperability. So we start the exercise to make this means of verification, okay? That basically they are like a checklist, okay? So we get the recommendation from the EOSC Interoperability Framework. We will do in the future with other recommendations from the different task forces related with interoperability, the Technical Interoperability Task Force and Semantic Interoperability Task Force. Okay? And also we inspire in the semantic interoperability profiles. Okay, semantic interoperability profiles, as you know, there is a battery of questions, and well, you can analyze what is the interoperability or how the interoperability is implemented in some community or even in some institution. Okay, so in this case, it's more related with the institution. In our case, we are going to focus more in these components. Okay, these EOS components. So I'll just put it some examples. For example, from the recommendation 4, we have the easy access to data sources available in different forms. I mean, there is some means of verification that, for example, is the data access processes documented? Okay, there is a documentation is also available. If you have an authentication to access to this information, okay, so it's documented also how to do it. Does the service use more than one data format? Are all data formats? So the idea was, okay, we are going to go one recommendation by the other one, and we will try to we can say split in, or well, build different questions to try to figure out if this recommendation is being implemented in this component or not. There is another example, in this case about the semantic artifacts. So it's about associated documentation for semantic artifacts. So are the semantic artifacts documented? Is the documentation publicly available? Because if you have the documentation but it's not open to the people, it's difficult, no, to try to understand how it works, this semantic artifact. What are the attributes, or in the case of ontology, the concepts that they manage. Also, sometimes it's, especially with ontologies, it's very useful to have like a diagram, no, with the different concepts, attributes, etc. So, as I told you before, the idea was, okay, we have this recommendation, we try to create some questions or checklists about this recommendation, just to see the level of implementation of them. Okay. Then we transform into different criteria, metrics, etc. Okay. And you can find some examples right here. Your semantic artifact must be licensed, your semantic should have an open license, etc. So the current work now is we are transforming in these metrics, okay? And for that purpose, we want to use one of the components that they are being developing right now in FAIRCORE for EOS. This is the compliance assessment toolkit. Okay, you can find the link right there. Okay, so in this case, we are going to transform this means of verification into matrix and criteria. Also to try to define what is the how can interoperability policy could be work. Okay, for sure we don't want to say, okay, this is an interoperability policy, we don't is immutable, etc. No, our idea and the things that we want to generate in our project in for impact is basically to have a draft, a document to start a discussion about this potential interoperability policy. Okay, and finally we have the policy and the means of verification. Then we are be able to check the compliance of a component with this interoperability policy. Okay, and as I said before, this interoperability policy could be applied to the EOS or could be applied to a different institution, okay? So, for example, in the case of institution, if you want to make interoperable some of the, I don't know, services that you have in your institution, like data repository, software repository, authentication system, whatever, okay? Then you have to define this interoperability policy, okay? As we have also that data sharing agreements and service level agreements, well, you have to define this in a more bigger framework, this interoperability policy. And in this interoperability policy, you can see that the different elements that you have in your institution is compliant with this policy or not. Okay? So basically, this is the idea we have in Fair Impact, and I would like to know your opinion about it, or is too naive maybe, or it has a future or not. So anyone wants to comment something about it? No. Okay. So, well, if you are interested to know more, you can find my email. So just send me an email, and we can have a brief call. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to give the floor to Clement Jonquet, that he's going to talk now about the semantic artifact catalog. Clement, the floor is yours.
Okay, give me 1 second to, okay, you guys need to give me the right to share my screen. I can send the demand. Someone should see that. Is that you, Esteban, or someone?
You should have now the rights, Clement.
Okay, perfect. I see it. Now it is. So let me get myself rearranged with those screens here, being sure. So do you guys confirm seeing my PowerPoint semantic artifact catalog as a EOS component?
Yes,
Yes.
we can see it.
Okay, well, let's go. Thanks. Yes, thanks, Esteban, for that great introduction. And I'm just going to go over some of the work we are doing in the context of Fair Impact on one of those EOS components that were introduced by Esteban before. So it's really like, okay, taking the perspective on trying to say what are the propositions that Fair Impact is doing to kind of address some of the elements that are inside the semantic interoperability framework. So just a little history note, we had several synchronization force workshop, and the first one that we had about two years ago now, we invited folks to let us know about what their communities was doing on which semantic artifact catalog they were using, if there was some of them in their communities. And last year we also experimented and worked with different aspects related to ontologies and metadata. So this year it's like important for us to, and with you guys in the community, to share what are the paths to implement the interoperability framework. I mean, just to avoid, Carol, it's not that you were that you were kind of you did put the diagram, and we were chatting on the chat on this, but in a couple of definitions that I'm using at the beginning of the slide, and they are not absolute, of course, but in the context of EOSC, I think we kind of agreed, or we kind of make the effort also inherited from Fair and the effort within the semantic interoperability framework, and also Jan's task in the context of Fair. I mean, we have that term now. It was what it was, but it is easy to actually use it as an overarching term for ontologies, terminologies, taxonomies, vocabularies, metadata schemas, and eventually even metadata standards. And so in the context of this talk, I also talk and describe semantic artifact catalogs are it's also a broader term to encompass things like ontology repositories. Sometimes they are called registries, vocabulary service, or terminology service. Sometimes even in some cases, metadata schema catalogs. And the later presentation will talk about crosswalks and mappings. I'll call them formal links between the content of these semantic artifacts. And we see here on the left the diagram that was similarly proposed to in the chat by Carl. And what's important there, and that slide also come from Jan, is to think in terms of their life cycle. Maybe Jan, you'll reuse it later, but I like this slide because it actually pitch about the fact that semantic artifacts help to support semantic interoperability. And that's why we are on the picture now. That's why we work on this subject in the context of fair impact. It's because it's going to help us eventually to address the semantic interoperability aspects within the framework. And that's a slide that is coming from me. I mean, I use the term ontologies in this one because that's the one on which I'm doing my research. But for a long time, I've been using this slide to kind of illustrate the fact that ontologies are spread out in different formats, different size, with different structures. There is an increasing numbers of them. They overlap. We need to map them. You have the evolution of the numbers of ontologies in BioPortal, and I should update this slide now because it ends like more than 5 years ago. But if I will do it, then you'll see the numbers increasing, continuing to increase, and the variety also of representation language. And so it's been a long time that we are advocating on the fact that, and here in that slide, I'm using the term of ontology repositories instead of semantic artifact catalog, because this is my main activity, but this is the same philosophy. And our motto was that putting them available, those catalogs, help to address the fact that ontologies and those or any semantic artifacts need to be fair object. And this is part of the FAIR principle in itself, that FAIR principle, they should themselves be a fair object. And so the screenshot that you see here come from one of the portals that we develop in the context of Fair Impact and other partnerships called AgroPortal, in which we make semantic artifact accessible, findable, described with a lot of metadata, connected one another in a certain way at the metadata level or at the content level, and then eventually reusable because they are easily accessible and described in our platform. So, well, that's the 2 and 3 introduction slide, but the core of the presentation really relies on those things coming up. I mean, Esteban, you already did the job on that, so I'm going to pass. But the component on which we are working on is really these ones, the semantic artifact catalog. There are going to be presentation also on the mapping repository. My focus will be on the semantic artifact catalog, but I also englobe the mapping repository a little bit on it because those two things goes together. And it happens that even before Fair Impact, even before EOSC Interoperability Framework, we were already working on semantic artifact catalogs, and our catalogs do include a mapping repository inside the catalog themselves. Because when you do one, then you usually do the other one. And if you do the second one, then you usually embark a semantic artifact catalog when you do a mapping repository. So they really go together. And in the context of the project, some of the projects we are working on, we are also developing and answering some elements related to that. And so, and if we go to the text itself, and sorry if the slide is a little bit dense there, I'm not going to read through it, but I want you to get those extract of the text in the interoperability framework and the problems that they are raising, the lack or overabundance of metadata model, the fact that shared semantic artifact, the term was already there, inside need to be shared inside and across the communities. The fact that these artifacts need to be sufficiently well documented. They need to be fair also, and we need to evaluate that level of fairness. And eventually those semantic artifact catalog themselves need to be federated, or they need to harvest their content to one another or things like that. Eventually, there is also the notion of mappings that is also mentioned there. So those are some extracts from the text that I think should be our guideline in terms of where we go with EOS project and how we address those guidelines that were those specifications such as the EOSC Interoperability Framework. So, and I mean, the semantic artifact catalogs, going back to the notion of really SAC, a semantic artifact catalog, it's also a topic that I've been also very much studied recently. I mean, the latest semantic interoperability task force did produce an important deliverable related to the EF, and it was like focusing a lot on those two components. And there was also kind of an important publication about the maturity model of catalogs that was more or less also produced by the task force there. I mean, 95% except me that was also added to the paper, and I was not in the task force. But well, that's one of the reasons why Fair Impact has some work in the context of a War Package 4 that some of you may have heard already about, where we want to have a greater and more harmonized use of semantic artifact through the EOSC ecosystem, leading to semantic interoperability within and between disciplines. That's our motto. And this motto, I'll show you how we work and develop on semantic artifact catalogs, addressing different aspects of it in the context of this framework. I mean, taking into bracket not bracket, quote, sorry. We address different aspects such as governance, the creation of those artifacts, their mappings, their sharing and reuse, and the fairness assessments of those, some of them. And so, well, you remember some of those slides, maybe some of you, but in the War Package 4, really the focus is really to go from one community to another one and then use things, outputs, and experience that have been working related to ontologies and metadata in things that have been working in one community and bringing to another community. And the philosophy is also to have that cross communities and also across research objects. So our research objects are semantic artifacts, but we are also investigating mappings, research software, and things like that in the context of the War Package. And so this is kind of the listing of the slide I'm going to present after that, except the one that are in italic there, that because, I mean, of course, you understand that I cannot present everything that we are doing related to semantic artifact and their catalogs in the context of fair impact here. But I'm going to show you some catalogs that were there and that we help consolidate, some new catalogs, where I'm going to show you some fair enabling tools, the fact that we've done a review about them, the fact that we are working on a metadata standard to describe those semantic artifacts and use that standard to provide a shared API specification for catalogs. And other aspects will be presented somewhere else or in the context of this talk, for example, the last one toward the specification of fair mapping. So let's go. Let's dig into those slides and outputs of the project here. Well, first things we do in order to help communities is consolidate some of the existing catalogs that are already there. So AgroPortal, EcoPortals were embarked in at the beginning of the project, and they are published and maintained by INRAE and the LifeWatch ERIC research infrastructure. And they are providing, I mean, for the ecology, biodiversity area and for the agriculture, agronomy area, services and tools where we host. I mean, you see the numbers in AgroPortal, and those numbers have already changed. We have 25 more ontologies since those slides there. But what we've done also in Fair Impact, following Fair Impact philosophy, is help new community to adopt and deploy their own catalog. So we are working right now with people in the earth sciences, people in astronomy. Earth Science has deployed a portal already online since about a year and a half now called Earth Portal. Astronomy, we are working with them. It's not going to be Escape. It might be Astro Portal. We're looking for the name, but this is a prototype there, and we're going to go to further there. And we are also working outside of Fair Impact, helping out some other communities, such as, for example, the NFDI for biodiversity or other groups. And working also with other communities. So this is really one of our first mission in the context of War Package 4, helping out communities with respect to those catalogs. So I could not resist an illustration of the one that I'm actually pushing for years. I mean, AgroPortal has an ontology repository for agri-food. If you go online and everything goes well, you will see the different kind of features that we offer for a catalog. But the key aspect that we want to put further is really that a semantic artifact catalog is not only a metadata catalog. I mean, we store the metadata of those semantic artifacts, but also their content, and we serve their content, which means people can make search or use services that actually leverage the content of those ontologies, vocabularies, etc. And in the context of Fair Impact and multiple also other initiatives, we are also working with a community that we call the OntoPortal Alliance, which was for us like essential to kind of show how we can go from one community into another one. The OntoPortal Alliance is really a group of folks and infrastructure research lab going together and trying to say, oh, if what we have done in a certain community and the technology can be reused in another one, can we actually do it in another community? So this part of the support that we've been provided to EcoPortal, to Earth Portal, or even BioDiv Portal in the context of Fair Impact has been enabled by the fact that we are all together inside an alliance in which we reuse a generic technology called OntoPortal. And OntoPortal is also an alliance that actually put those folks together to actually push for the adoption, the increase of semantic uptake, the adoption of the software, and the adoption of semantic more largely. So among the examples of results we've achieved in the context of Fair Impact is, I mean, Fair Impact is very much into evaluating the level of fairness. And in the context of War Package 4, the level of fairness, War Package 4 and War Package 5, the level of fairness of the objects that we're interested in was semantic artifacts. And so what we have done in War Package 5 is develop different tools and work on the convergence of those tools. OFAIR is illustrated on the slide is one. FOOPS is another one developed by our partners at UPM. And what we've done in the context of War Package 4 is that we have made those that tool, for example, OFAIR, available in multiple semantic artifact catalogs. So different communities know now if they can actually rely on a standard methodology, and eventually we'll have another tool inside those catalogs too. The FOOPS tool will be also eventually integrated inside the UI, so it's more easy for folks to compare tools. But we have worked on doing that. It was there before the project within AgroPortal, and we made it available in other portals in the context of Fair Impact. Fair Impact has also worked on a nice milestone document, I mean, deliverable that do a review and an analysis of like a bunch of semantic artifact catalogs. So we've identified something like 173. Some of them are retired, and some of them are not repositories. But you see the numbers among the ones that are not retired. Most of them are repositories there. And we also study the generic technologies that people can actually leverage to deploy those catalogs, like OntoPortal or OLS or Scosmos or Tematres or even OpenTeso, very much used in the social sciences and humanities. And so I really invite you to say, if you're wondering what's the appropriate semantic artifact catalog in my domain, does it exist? What is it? Which technology it's based on? And up to a certain level, how much it helps when you drop an ontology or you drop a vocabulary in there, how much it helps addressing the FAIR principles. We've tried to make it also do a little bit of that study in that deliverable. So please have a look, and feedbacks are also welcome for us to enrich this list. So in this study, I really make distinction between the fact of evaluating how much a semantic artifact was fair, that was really done with, for example, tools like OFAIR. In this study, we were like, how does it help to actually put an ontology inside a catalog? Or does it help the fact that it becomes actually a fair object? In the context of Fair Impact, we also work on a standard, a metadata standard for semantic artifacts. So, I mean, the interoperability framework will point the fact that the object, whatever they are, that the semantic interoperability framework should be based on, those objects should have metadata standard for each of them. And so our object being semantic artifact, and we work on a metadata for metadata standard for semantic artifact. It's called MOD. It was originally initiated and launched in the context of RDA, then follow up with the context of Fair is Fair, and now Fair Impact is really the one pushing for the specification of this vocabulary, where you will find here at the central part the notion of semantic artifact, but also the notion of semantic artifact catalogs and properties to semantically describe them. And this is also in one of our deliverables. And so what we have done also in the context of Fair Impact, in order to help communities to make their semantic artifact catalogs, whatever technology they use, more interoperable, to ease the fact that they should rely on one another, to consume the content from one and another one. Then we proposed in Fair Impact a standard, I mean, we call it standard, but for the moment, at least it's called Shared API for Semantic Artifact Catalog, based on that vocabulary that you've seen in the previous slide, MOD. We call it MOD API, and it lists all of the operation that one will expect to see in a semantic artifact catalog in order for other clients to actually consume the content from those catalogs, whatever it comes from. And I like to point to the group here that we have an open call now open since October 1st, in which we call for semantic artifact catalog providers to come over with us and then get some money in the context of Fair Impact to implement that API, and then eventually demonstrates that that interoperability is possible. We are also working on I call it an early work on the federation of catalogs. I mean, based the fact some of us are using OntoPortal, so we don't need to do that API thing. I mean, we're going to do it also, of course, but our APIs are already shared. So in the context of Fair Impact, we went together and start working on a prototype where we're going to demonstrate by the end of 2024 that we can actually federate the content of portals, coming result from in AgroPortal that will come from EcoPortal and EarthPortal, and vice versa, firing search on one portal and going to another one, etc., etc. And we have a first version of that federation that will be done and accomplished and published in the context of Fair Impact. So that was more or less the content of our results. I'll point you here to our deliverables and also the one that are coming up. I mean, some aspect that I haven't mentioned about the governance. We have two deliverables of that: the semantic artifact fairness assessment methodology in order to build semantic artifact directly with fair principle taking into consideration, and the 2 or 3 deliverables that I have mentioned there. And please please stay tuned also, because in the last months of the project, we're going to have also like a deliverable on the global life cycle of those fair semantic artifacts, but also guidelines for mappings and crosswalks, but also an illustration of how they can be used, those semantic artifacts, in the context of data repositories. And I think it could be also very interesting for future projects that are going to work with data catalogs, data repositories, to see the prototypes and the connectors we have implemented to connect to our semantic artifact catalogs. So I've tried to do a little like that, but I'm not super happy about this line, saying, yes, it's done, no, it's not done. I mean, so I'll pass on that, so you'll not analyze it too much, but the key idea is that we'll do that exercise. So we'll try to do that exercise of analyzing what's going to be done, how fair impact has contributed in the context of our upcoming Work Package 6 deliverables, in which we are going to demonstrate that. So in conclusion, I will say semantic artifact catalogs are a key component for the EOSC Interoperability Framework. I haven't talked about the mapping repository things because we have different strategies for that, and I focus only on the core service of serving the content of semantic artifact. Well, we have also with the Ponto Portal technology, it's part of the side activities that I'm having, and then I'm also pushing up and trying to build on in the context of fair impact. With the Ponto Portal technology, we are trying to convince different EOS communities that we do have a technology deployable at the click of the mouse for a project in the or community in the context of EOSC. Well, click of the mouse taken with quotes a little bit, but that's eventually our goal. Every new community, new use case bring new ideas. We've seen that in Fair Impact very much. It has been a catalyzer for us, but please be sure, contact us, participate until the end of the project. At least we can sustain that activity of supporting groups with respect to those aspects. And I did mention it a couple of times. There are even more mentioned to semantic artifact, and I invite you to check our deliverables for also the next talk to get some info about that. I don't know if we take questions now but I can take a few questions, if any, and otherwise we move on to the rest.
Yeah, maybe a short question, Clement. We can comment more in detail this component during the discussion time. So, Barbara, just only one question.
I just want to say I am so much looking forward to this API so that we finally can really search across all these portals, because this is so much missing, right? So I work on all these different portals just to find something, but it's a horror, and it would be so much nicer to have this. So
Barbara, thanks for your encouragement. They are very appreciated. I just want to mention, we are providing the API, it's already online, but we're going to try to help portals and catalogs to implement it, but Fair Impact doesn't have the engagement to actually make it adopted in plenty of communities. So we might need a couple of years and maybe a couple of
years, no.
But we're on the path to that.
Okay, I just say if this comes, I will then come to you with a service that we are building around iAdopt that could then work across these. Yeah.
Maybe we can continue this conversation later. Thank you, everyone. So, Jan, you have 10 minutes or less, if it's possible. Okay. Just very brief about the work that you are doing together with Jonas, and then we can enter in deep during the discussion.
Sure. So do you see my slides?
Yeah, sure.
Yes. Yeah, sure. So
Yeah.
Clement already mentioned, I'm going to talk about mappings crosswalk, and Jonas, my colleague from Faircore for EOSC, is going to talk about the MSCR, which is the service related. So just briefly, we've seen with the EOSC Interoperability Framework that basically mapping is also a first-class citizen in the semantic interoperability framework in the semantic view. And it requires, as those semantic artifacts or ontologies, if you want, it requires a service that actually allows to access them programmatically. Right. One of the ideas that it support FAIR, and FAIR is about machine actionability. Therefore, you need to have services that goes and get the information you want without you having to search in different repositories. So I'm going to be very brief. What's a mapping? This is an example. I love that example. I'm a cat lover, so I cannot resist to do that. But if you imagine the system where you have two databases that contains cat pictures, one used the label domestic cat, the other one used the real species name. Well, you as human, you can understand that you want to collect both. The computer does not understand that. And you need to clarify actually the bridges that exist between both so that the computer can actually work out this and gives you the images you're looking for, meaning the images of cats. And you need to express as well for computers, because they're a bit dumb, right? They just do what you told them to do. They don't understand the semantics. You can also have other relations like wider than that will help searching and aggregating data. So this is the most common example of mappings. This is called a semantic mapping. We are working on this in Fair Impact, and one of our objectives is to make them fair. There are tons of other mappings, and I'm not going to talk about it, otherwise we'll spend more than 10 minutes. So I'm going to be very quick on the objectives of Fair Impact on that. The idea is to establish a set of recommendations on how to make this mapping fair. They are very costly to actually do. It's really time consuming, and it would be great if people that do these mappings can share them in a machine actionable format so that it can be integrated in search systems, for instance, or used to actually aggregate data. So one of the goals is to also work with existing models like SESOM, and one of the first recommendations is use SESOM as much as you can, and I keep saying that since the beginning of the project. But it's to work with SESOM and other models to actually have a machine actionable common exchange model, meaning if you have mappings that already exist in a format, you can just convert it to SESOM and then you can exchange it freely, and it can be published with the same format. How we do that, and we engage with communities a lot to co-create, test, and adopt the model for fair mappings, and to identify the methodologies and practices around mappings. One of the ideas is that these mappings, like semantic artifact, they also have a life cycle, and one of the key components should be governance. That's something we haven't started yet to work on, but that's part of our process. And it's part of the approach that we're taking in the tasks we're dealing with mapping in the project, is to look at the two aspects. One is the technical aspect on how to make them fair, and the other one is the practical aspect on how to make mappings. What are the process you need to think? What are the process that exist that you can reuse if you are starting the mapping process? How do we work? We organized workshops, and I'm listing just the ones that we're organizing in the context of Fair Impact. We are very active also on the RDA plenary scene. We actually opened up a survey that's still open. So if you want to contribute to the discussions on mappings, please fill in the survey so that we understand what are the practices you are using in the community on mapping and the models you use to publish them. Now, one of the activities we are having, we want to work with and engage with more communities that we can in the context of Fair Impact. So we have been working toward the creation of a fair mapping RDA working group, which is currently under review. And this work is done with my colleague Younes from FairCore for EOSC. You have a link to the charter. We are finalizing our answer to the TAB, which was quite positive. We hope that the working group will be validated before the plenary 23, so that the Bird of a Feather session we're organizing in Costa Rica would be kind of the kickoff of the working group. Just to give you a hint on the outputs that we are planning. So of course, the fair recommendations, the idea is that they are taken up also by the working group so that the international community can actually contribute. We also have the practical mapping framework and guidelines, which is the second side of the work that we are doing in Fair Impact. We want to collect mapping use case, and the idea is that we try to come up with a template so that we have a harmonized description of these templates, so we understand better the different contexts in which mappings are used and the different types of mapping that exist, so that we can start establishing a classification / ontology, because mappings comes with the same problem with ontology, control vocabulary, thesaurus. These are not necessarily well-defined concepts, and mappings in the words in the mouth of different communities means different things. And so the idea is that we start working on clarification so that it makes things easier. And based on these classification, we will try to come up with an extended model so that you can share them in a machine actionable format. And using all this, we are planning to create a file mapping knowledge base. So I will stop there. If you have questions, there are plenty of time for discussions, I hope. Otherwise, you can always contact me. Now I would like to give the floor to my colleague Jonas. And Jonas, if you want, I can just click on the slides when we...
I will let you know. Thanks. Okay, so I'm gonna just quickly go over the metadata schema and crosswalk registry that we are building in the FAIR Core for EOSC project. And I'm on this slide, I've used the vocabulary from the interoperability framework. So I'm thinking that catalog is a more of a registry. So the MSCR works both as a catalog and a repository, as similar to what Clément was saying, that MSCR also it has the metadata, and but it also has the actual content, and it can support multiple semantics business object. That was also a word from the term from the report. So metadata formats and on different levels, ontologies, terminologies, data models, whatever that is, controlled vocabularies, and then mappings and crosswalks. And you can use it to work with existing resources that are maintained out somewhere else, for example, in existing portals or existing services. And when you want to publish it for map or make it available for mapping, then you can put it into, or you can register it into MSCR. Or you can use it as a primary place for storing your semantic artifacts. Next slide, please. So here are the four main features of MSCR. So you can register schemas, you can register crosswalks. That means that you can, so that can come from can be a file that you have in your hand on your computer, or it can be a file or a set of files, a content hosted somewhere else. But you can register that, schemas and crosswalks. Then you can take those schemas and start up a crosswalk editor. So you select a source schema and you select a target schema, and then you can create your crosswalk between them from scratch. And that becomes content of the MSCR. So the content is basically schemas and crosswalks. And then the final part of the puzzle is that you can take those crosswalks and you can use what I'm here calling a transformation engine, and use input data, instance data, and a crosswalk to turn that instance data into output data. So basically take metadata records, take the crosswalk, turn those metadata records into something else. Next slide, please. A couple of details about these features. So here's a laundry list of the formats that we're supporting. So MSCR takes the term schema quite liberally. So those CSV, XSD, JSON schema, enumerations, COS, RDFS, OWL, shackle, all of those are schemas for MSCR. So those are the kind of things that you can register as a source or target. Then for crosswalks, you can use SESOM as was mentioned, or for mappings, and XSLT. So a lot of the concrete implementations of crosswalks are XSLTs. You can enhance the registered schema by adding a reference to data type registry to the schema's property. So you can say that instead of a string, the data type is, for example, a handle or a DOI. And you can also say that the values of a certain property come from a certain registered vocabulary. So this kind of like adds to the semantic information of those schemas beyond this, the schema description, what the original schema description formats allow you to do. For example, a CSV file, it's a very simple format. And what it does then, it provides a harmonized view to all these schemas. So regardless of what was the original format, you should be able to view them in the same way. They look the same for mapping. Next, please. And then you can use that harmonized view of those schemas to create the crosswalks. there is a support for simple mappings, like semantic mappings between two concepts, and also complex mappings that can take many to one, one to many functions, and things like that. There is a little bit of mapping metadata available, but it will be extensive. So look for SESOM. We are looking for SESOM model to the metadata model of this individual mapping. And actually, it supports all the semantic mapping, structural mappings, and data mappings. So this vocabulary, existing vocabulary crosswalks could be used, for example, to do data mappings as part of a structural mapping when you turn one record set into another. And then the operationalization, so that the last part, the transformation part, is currently facilitated by different kind of export functions. So you can export the crosswalk as SESOM if the source and target formats are such that makes sense. You can actually generate XSLTs for transformations between formats, CSV, JSON, XML formats in any way you want. And then there is RML transformation, RML generation that also allows you to turn CSV, XML, and JSON into RDF. And there's a versioning and PIDs being assigned to all the content, including individual mappings. Next one, please. And as a summary, so the UX is designed for non-developers, developers in mind. So the idea is that anyone could work with the schemas, and the most important thing for the user of the UI is to understand the content, the semantics of those schemas, and what is the correct mapping. All the features are also available through an API, and it works on a technical and semantic level. So I'm considering this kind of structural mappings as a technical interoperability, because you don't have to understand what you're transferring, but if you can transfer it in a proper format, you're good. But then you can also look at it from the semantic level. And as I said, it works on multiple different semantic artifact types. And I also took a quote from the IF report. So through MSCR, you can take these crosswalks schemas as you can store them as semantic artifacts, make them available, make them machine readable and machine actionable, and they will have persistent identifiers and they can be shared and used. Thank you. And reused.
Thank you, Jonas. Very nice presentation. Also Jan. So I think we can move to the discussion part. Okay. So Nina, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hi. So we have like 20 minutes left, so I'm not sure that I will have the time to present you my exercise that I wanted to, but I think there's a lot of questions on chat, so I think maybe we can start with all the questions that have been asked and so try to answer them. And if we have the time, I can go to my exercise. But so if anyone want to talk about one subject. I saw that there is some comment from Barbara. Barbara, yeah, you can go ahead.
Sorry. Still, to me, it's a puzzle how this will work really together. So you have the MSCR, and then we have all these mappings already existing in ontologies and so on. I'm working daily on mappings. So I wonder, should I then put everything into that? So I see the value, but I see also the burden. So to do this then, or not sure how the workflow should be then. So can you say something about it?
Yeah, so when it comes to existing mappings, it might not be that much of an added value if you just basically put it somewhere else. But there aren't, for example, a lot of services that work on different kinds of mapping. So so you could, I mean, there could be a value, for example, or one scenario where you might want to add these kind of existing semantic mappings, for example, as part of the MSCR, is that information, the connections between different classes or different concepts can be used and this is something that is still in the planning phase, but I'm hoping to create features in the MSCR where that kind of semantic information can be used to help with the structural mappings, so that you could be suggested. You could have suggested mappings or semi-automatically added mappings based on this kind of semantic information that is behind the scenes. So that's one thing, but for publishing, maybe the replication is not that good idea.
Can I complement your answer?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. I mean, there is the fact that we have use cases for MSCR where people have already pre-existing mappings, and the curation of these mappings when the source and target schemas evolve becomes a headache, and that's why there are organizations who would like to use the MSCR to kind of publish the mappings, version them. It has a kind of capacity of a group working on them. So a schema can be crosswalk can be jointly worked on by a group of people. So it's kind of a co-working environment for crosswalks mappings at the same time. So this is a kind of every version of a crosswalk has a PID, and this allows kind of hosting them and versioning them. You can create community endorsed versions of crosswalks which are public to everyone, or then you can have kind of private versions of crosswalks that are specific to your data use case, which is a bit specific. So you can tailor them to a specific unique context, which you maybe think that it's not like shareable for all. So I'm not sure, Jonas knows better, of course, the technicalities of if you are able to export your crosswalk in SESOM, is it possible to import that crosswalk into MSCR?
Yeah.
But then there should probably be the requirement that both the target and destination, source and target schema need to be registered there in order to import the crosswalk, because it has to have the beginning and endpoints of the crosswalk in the system as well.
That's currently the way it goes, but we have been discussing maybe relaxing that'll to make the kind of like make it easier for people to register existing crosswalks that are just somewhere. So I think this point that Tommy made about the collaborative aspect of working with those schemas and crosswalks is an important one.
Okay. Jan, go ahead, and after Maggie.
I think Maggie was first, so.
Sorry, really sorry. Okay, go ahead.
No, actually, Jan was first.
Ladies first.
Okay, I will go then. Yeah, so I just sort of picking up on something that Tommy just said, and I think a couple of other people may also have touched upon earlier, you know, this distinction between private information or things that you keep in a sort of developmental phase. Maybe you will share it later outside of your own research context. That reminds me of these efforts that were picked up in, for instance, the EUDAT projects, if anyone remembers those, a few years back, for instance, to try to develop and have an annotation service, because I think there are so many different aspects and cases for where researchers would want to be able to annotate different resources. The semantic ones is only one aspect there, and this is something that I think could also help in terms of supporting collaborations, especially interdisciplinary ones. I'm not meaning to hijack this discussion here today with this annotation issue, but I think it's something that maybe those service providers or service developers could also think about.
So I guess
Go ahead, sorry.
So I think it was a great idea that I let you talk about it first, Maggie, because you're talking about B2 Note, which was an annotation service I developed in the context of UDAT 2020. So I agree, annotation is a great tool. It's a great tool to actually share and add information, especially when the data is published. You cannot change the metadata record, but you may need to want to add specific keywords that are missing in the initial list of keywords without having to go through the trouble of asking the person in charge to actually do that on the repo, which he will most likely not do. So one of the key issues when you start talking about semantic annotation is access to the semantic artifacts themselves. So out of this work, there has been some initiative and some small project that try to actually aggregate content from different ontology repository. That was before Ontoportal was trying to harmonize the API and so on. So that will simplify things, but there's not only Ontoportal, there are the LOV, there are Scosmos vocabulary systems, and so on and so forth. So in the context of FAIR is Fair and EOS Pillar, we developed the Federated Fair Data Space / FAIRCAT, now it's called FAIRCAT, which was a service which aimed at federating metadata content from different repository, and we use that to actually harmonize BioPortal, 3 Ontoportal repository and the NERC vocabulary service to align it with the minimum metadata schema that we co-developed with Clément. And I can give you the link to the FAIR data point it's associated to. So one of the key issues is if you want to annotate, you need to have access to the concepts, right? And these concepts are in many places, so you need to retrieve them, index them, so that actually there is an autocomplete function that helps the scientist not to search through many different repositories to find the right concepts, but make suggestions so that he can actually do that on its own. So there's still a little bit of work, but and I don't know, we are discussing in UDAT whether or not we should revive B2 Note, so that's something that we need to consider. Yeah, so that was important. But the same goes for mapping, right? I mean, if you want to do mappings between different ontologies that are not necessarily in the same repository, then you need to access the content, and you need to have services like those that are developed by UNAS that will help actually making this mapping come through. One of the real issues is that when you start mapping metadata schemas, well, you don't find, they are not published. For instance, DCAT, you have an RDF file, but it's not necessarily published. It's on GitHub. I don't think they have a PID, right? And if you start thinking about mappings, basically they are just a triplet of PIDs: the source, the target, and the relation, and then you get all the metadata associated to it. So this is some thinking we're doing in the context of FAIR Impact. What does it mean to do a mapping? What is a mapping concretely that we hope to actually feed back to FAIRcore for EOSC so that they can improve the MSCR through the recommendations we're doing on the FAIR mappings. Just what I wanted to say. Stop here, I talk too much.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you, everybody. So do we have other questions or other aspect that you want to discuss? We have like 10 minutes left, or you want to have like more like Carol Glob suggests to have like a summarized discussion for the future? Do you want to go on this kind of stimulation, or you have still aspect that you want to clarify?
I have a question for Jonas. Jonas, have you considered how this component, the MSCR, will interact with the other components of the EOSC Interoperability Framework?
Well, for example, the data type registry was one of the components mentioned in the report. So that's already something that we have been implementing. So but it brings about again kind of like this discussion about the responsibilities of different components and different services. So because complex data type is basically a schema and then where should it go? But I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing that there are options, because different services might work with exactly the same type of content, but they might offer different kind of features. So I don't like categorically see it as a bad thing that you have options. And of course, I'm talking about only features. Then of course you can have options on who is actually running it, the service. You might trust some organization more than some other, for example. Now I have to try to look at can you give an the example of the services in the framework? Well, of course, the identifier services, those are, or the PID services, that's already also integrated.
Yeah, but for example, so I was thinking maybe so this component is not just only for the EOSC Interoperability Framework. I assume that it could be exported to another interoperability framework, or even they can be deployed in institutions, or does it make sense?
Yeah, I'd say, because in a large organization, you have a lot of different schemas, different data formats coming from different systems, and you might, or if you don't have any kind of you might want a centralized way of knitting all those things together. And one of the things that I've been asked is, so how does this relate to ETL tools? So I wouldn't say that. So I would say that this can be used as a complementary thing for that kind of like data exchange. So you can work on the crosswalks. You don't have to worry about how the data actually moves, but you just work on the kind of like the semantics and a little bit of the structure, of course, because that might be required, and then that's it. And then the other parts of the organization can come in and fetch the exports from the system and start using those in a mass transformation of data, for example.
Okay,
Thank you.
Jan, you can go.
Yeah, so that relates to what Jonas was saying, and also what we have been seeing in the discussions we had about mappings. Mappings definitively mean so many different things. Some people are talking about data structure. Some people are talking about metadata. The semantics, of course, is the most common one. That's the one I showed with the cat. That's you relate two terms in two different ontologies, and you create bridges between them. There are also API calls, mappings for brokering. So that's why we have this fair mapping working group, which will extend fair impact, right? And the idea is that we will work together, collecting as much use cases we can, so that we can identify the different types of mappings and what people means, and also in which context they are used, so that, well, first we can make them exist. Second, we may name them with a proper name. So should we use data mapping for data structure? Should we create this classification so that when we're talking with people, you don't spend 10 minutes trying to figure out what the other is saying and to realize that he was not talking at the same level. Now, when you start working with mapping, you also realize that semantics is tightly linked to structure and data. So in the end, when you will work with concrete use cases, you will have to do semantic mappings, but also structural mappings on different objects on metadata, and the data itself as well on underlying data. So that's very interesting, because again, we see just mapping as the perspective of semantics, but in the end, there is an interplay between the different levels that is of importance. I will stop there.
Yeah, Barbara, you can go.
Yeah, I had a question about the timeline of the MSCR. And I also wanted to say, because Jan addressed that a mapping, if has not an DOI or persistent identifier itself, it's not really, you cannot really find it. I just mentioned, in the meantime, we have just built a template with nano publications where you can create for each mapping an identifier. It's just an exercise, right? So whenever we have the MSCR ready to go, I will also use it. But in the meantime, I'm storing my mappings with SESAM using nano publication template.
Yeah, so about the timeline, I was trying to write you an answer, but this is way better. So we are hoping to open up the release environment, which is not a production environment, it's a release environment. We can discuss later what it means. To the users who have submitted the form of interest through our website, and we will do that next month. We will open up for those users next month, and then we're hoping to open it up for everyone. Anyone interested or next year, so maybe a couple of months before the project ends. And we're hoping to run some try to get some proper feedback from the actual users, because I've been now using it. I've been creating hundreds of workflow crosswalks as I'm trying to implement the operationalizations to these different kind of generators, and I can see that there are a lot of problems with the crosswalk editor. So that's under very heavy development right now. And I wanted to comment on the identifiers for mappings. So MSCR will give every individual mapping an identifier, but it's a contextual identifier. So it's tied to the crosswalk context. So it is, but we could make a endpoint where you can get information about an individual. There are handles at the moment, so the handle would resolve to a description of an individual mapping.
Yeah, Jan, go ahead, and I think it will be the last.
Okay. There is an interesting, there's something we found out when working on the FAIR recommendations on the PIDs. So we need to provide globally unique, persistent, and resolvable identifier, and there are different ways of minting these grouperies. You can use the semantic web approach, which is minting pearls, so persistent URLs. There are the pearl.org system, there are W3AD, though there is an issue with the maintenance and the uniqueness of the URL with this. That happens, so there needs to be some rules. And then you can start thinking about the handle, which provides unique identifier, and you're sure they're globally unique, or you're very unlucky, or lucky, I don't know which sense, because the probability that you will have two identifiers that are identical is so low that it should not happen. But then it's not an HTTP protocol, it uses UDP, therefore you need a resolver, there are different types of calls that need to be made, and so on and so forth. And one thing that we realize is that we want to enforce, in order to make this mapping fair, that the collections of mapping or crosswalk has a PID and a metadata record, that each mapping, individual mapping, has a PID and a metadata record, right? Then that's a ton of PIDs that you will be generating, including the fact that in the end, the mapping is 3 PID altogether, the PID of the source, the PID of the target, and the PID of the relation. And when you start counting the number of PIDs, that becomes quite a lot. And I'm not talking about PIDs for metadata record at each level. Therefore, you start wondering scalability issues. Because if you really want to use these mappings, then you can start counting the number of calls you will need to make to different resolver to actually really leverage that mapping. Now, if it's just for one mapping, it sounds complicated. Imagine that you have millions of mappings. It's going to be very tricky. And I think, although we're trying to put that into context of FAIR, there will be some technical choices that need to be made so that we can guarantee scalability and usability of the mappings, so that it can be used for search, for instance, which is one of the purpose of the mapping, is to allow to get better results of search. And so that's something, and I don't have a solution, right? So I hope that we will be able to discuss this in the context of the fair mapping working group discussions on these. But at some point we need to say, okay, we are building mappings. They're going to be used. At some point we need to make sure that technically this is going to be sustainable and scalable as well. So we will have to make some choices. Just a comment. So.
Yes, thank you, Jan. So I think we can finish this workshop. Thank you for your time and for your participation. We will rate very carefully all the questions and answers from the chat, and we will reflect it in the report that we will generate. Okay. So I don't know if Sarah, you have some words to say? No?
No, just to thank you all for the very interesting discussions. We'll compile all the materials shared today, and we share them with you, including the recording of this meeting. And I invite you all to join and come back on the 7th of November, because we are gonna show you some of the preliminary recommendations that will come after all the sessions of the Synchronization Force in a public meeting open to all of you, for which instructions will follow. So again, thanks a lot to Esteban and to the facilitators of these meetings, and most of all to all of you who attended this and the previous session of this 2024 edition series. Thanks a lot.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.